All right, hello everyone. Before we get into the content of tonight's workshop, I just wanted to talk a little bit about who I am and the agency that I work for. So my name is Taylor Burnett. I'm a master's level counselor. I graduated from Rider University and I work for Anchor House. Anchor House is a nonprofit multi-service agency that services homeless, runaway, and at-risk youth in the area. My office is directly out of the Anchor House shelter, which is located on Center Street in Trenton, and I am the school outreach counselor. So basically my job through the agency is to conduct individual, group, and family counseling sessions, both in the schools and outside of. So some other topics that we deal with for youth are truancy, reconciliation, human trafficking, awareness, bullying prevention and intervention, conflict resolution, career and college readiness, you name it, we pretty much cover it. As far as tonight's presentation goes, I plan on discussing how we can help students manage their emotions during COVID-19 and beyond. We'll basically do a breakdown of youth social emotional development and the particular impacts that COVID-19 has had on that development and how we as parents, administrators, and other support professionals can help. In order to help our youth manage their emotions, we need to have a better understanding of what social emotional development is. It's basically how children start to understand who they are, what they're feeling, and what to expect when interacting with others. The process is gradual and integrative. This means you won't see results overnight, and each milestone they make in the process builds off of the one before. Now, I know some parents might be saying, so if my child doesn't do blank, or if they miss a step in the development, does that mean it's going to be stunted or that they're going to be set back? And the short answer is no. Thankfully, children, especially young children, are fairly resilient, especially if they have at least one supportive adult in their life. So if something like COVID-19 happens or was to happen again, having someone like you in their life, parents, administrators, whomever, who understands what they're going through is all they'll need to be happy, healthy, and successful. And with a few pointers from this presentation, it may be the easiest thing you do all year. With that being said, the end goal of not only this workshop, but social emotional development as a whole is being able to obtain emotional intelligence. That is the ability to identify and manage your own emotions, as well as the emotions of others. A simpler definition would be to say that how to feel an emotion, but not necessarily how to act on it. So the gentleman who cut me off on my way into work this morning, causing me to say a few unfavorable things, if I was somebody who practiced social emotional intelligence, I would have maybe bit my tongue a bit, but that was not me. So it's hard for some adults to grasp emotional intelligence, and we have to expect that it's going to be difficult for our youth as well, especially with everything that's going on. To successfully manage their emotions, our youth need to have an exuberant amount of social interaction, which right now is proving to be quite difficult, and the support and skills to process these interactions and learn from them going forward. Emotional regulation is essentially what is needed to achieve that, and it's a three-step process. It involves teaching children how to identify their emotions, identifying what's causing those emotions, and teaching them to manage them by themselves. When we teach kids that their emotions are valid, we help them view what they're feeling as normal and manageable, which is very important. Because if they're not familiar with the feeling of anger, we need to help them identify what that is, that it's a safe emotion to feel, and exactly how to deal with that. The best way to teach your child to react to anger appropriately is to show him or her how. Evidence suggests that kids pick up on our emotions and that those exposed to many negative emotions are more likely to struggle. Ultimately, helping them manage their emotions begins by validating the feelings, providing an environment where they feel safe to express them. And several studies have shown kids who feel safe are much more likely to develop and use appropriate emotional regulation skills to deal with difficult feelings. Now that we have a good understanding of what social emotional development looks like, we have to look at our expectations for that development versus what's actually happening. Had the spring of 2020 gone as planned, the life of an average child would have meant classrooms, baseball games, middle school dances, and birthday parties where they ate too much cake instead of driving in the back of their parents' car, past their friend's house, and honking horns. There would have been jokes and whispers exchanged in classrooms, cafeterias, and school buses. But instead, our children are learning from pillow forts and dining room tables, waving at their friends through computer screens, and running laps around their kitchen island in place of gym class. But just because this year and years to potentially come are going to be different than what we expected, it doesn't mean that we can't help our youth adjust and adapt, and that's essentially what I'm here for today. So impacts of COVID-19 and how we can address them. I have a few listed on the screen and I'm going to talk about these few in depth, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the limit. We truly don't know what the long-term effects are, but during our new normal, our lives under the social distancing guidelines look much different than we thought they would. So I'll discuss these few, more may pop up later. Some parents may say, well, I'm noticing my child is affected in this way, and we can work through it together. But the first one, and one that may seem obvious, is physical safety. It's important that we communicate with our children because the stress and anxiety associated with possibly contracting the coronavirus is already high on its own. But with a world of information and misinformation at their fingertips, it's our job to keep them informed so they can properly protect themselves. Although the experts are still learning more and more about the virus each day, the most we can do as parents and administrators is give them the most accurate and up-to-date information so they can make the healthiest of choices. Some ways to combat the stress and anxiety that come with worrying about their physical safety include, but are not limited to, mindfulness meditation, lessened screen time and exposure, or even just simple deep breathing exercises. As far as togetherness and inclusion goes, lacking the normal social interactions one would experience on a day-to-day basis can have a great impact on one's mental health. The biggest way to reverse the effects without risking actual in-person interaction is by keeping open lines of communication and letting the youth know that while they may feel they're alone in their struggles, they are in fact weathering the same storm as their peers and their family, just in slightly different boats. Sitting down as a family or virtually as friends to discuss how they feel throughout the pandemic, ideally once a week, will simulate empathetic responses, and that will facilitate the feeling of inclusion. So if mom sits down with her son and talks about how mom misses seeing her friends Tuesday nights at their book club, her son may say, wow, I didn't think mom felt the same way that I did about missing my friends. And it will facilitate either a similar disclosure or just open a line of communication that may not have existed otherwise. Children tend to have slightly one-track minds, and they kind of live in their own world, what their friendships are like, what their relationships are like, what their interactions are like at school, and they don't necessarily think that their parents or others around them feel similarly. So to know that they're not the only ones missing their friends or struggling working from home will definitely open up, like I said, lines of communication that may not have existed before, and giving them that outlet is probably one of the most important things that we can do. Control. This is a big one many parents may not be aware of, and truthfully, before I started putting together this presentation, I didn't really think of it either. But we're losing control during the pandemic, and it's a direct result of the uncertainties we face going forward. Not knowing when the kids can return to school, not knowing what attending college will look like in the future, when they're going to be able to see their friends again or be able to see their cousins they haven't seen since the holidays. All of this can induce a great amount of anxiety and depression. I know I felt similarly in my time during quarantine, so I can only imagine how a youth who can't necessarily wrap their head around the entire pandemic may feel. To counteract this lack of control, we must create control in other daily routines. This means don't just let our youth roll out of bed and log right onto the virtual school. Make it a point to wake them up early enough with enough time to eat, maybe 30 minutes of TV or reading, walk around the block at lunch, so forth and so on. Do this every day during the week, and maybe even create a more structured weekend, just maybe slightly more lax. Children thrive in routines, whether they know it or not. A lot of kids may not like going to bed at a certain time or waking up at a certain time or brushing their teeth before they go to bed. But if we were to remove any elements of their routine, such as going to bed at a certain time, they may be elated in the moment, but when it comes down to it, the long-term effects are going to be felt and they're going to be rather drastic. So keeping those routines for our kids are very important, and like I said, not something we may think about right away. And our worlds are completely thrown upside down. Any routine I had before March does not look the same now at all. And lastly, independence. This one applies more to older children who would ideally be using this time in their life to separate from their parents and develop a sense of autonomy, maybe by getting a job, saving up for a car, hanging out with friends, but returning home by a curfew. These activities promote independence and may look vastly different now that the economy and society is functioning on a much more restricted scale. Finding other ways, finding other ways to give your kids this freedom could include allowing them to maybe rearrange or redecorate their room, have some input on the meals that are cooked throughout the week, finding ways to earn money in traditional and non-traditional ways, because a lot of retailers are just starting to open back up, or restaurants are opening up at greater capacity, and just anything else to help them make informed decisions that impact their near or distant future. A little goes a long way with independence, and I feel like a lot of us, or at least maybe I'm just speaking for myself, lost a little bit of that independence when quarantine took place. I felt like I couldn't do a lot of things because of the restrictions, and it's by no means because I wasn't prepared to be independent, but because I was used to doing it a certain way for so long. So if we can foster the ability for youth to adapt in situations like this and express their independence in slightly different ways, I think the better off they'll be in the long run. So breaking up the virtual school day, this is information that may sound regurgitated for a lot of the parents or adults in the room. I'm sure you've maybe seen fellow parents share tips on social media. You might have gotten materials from the school district about preparing for the virtual learning environment. But I do feel like it's my duty as a counselor, or at least as the school outreach counselor, to remind parents and other support professionals about some of the really important elements that make up the virtual school day and how we can make it not so monotonous. Because let's face it, the education for our youth is one of the most important things that we can do for them right now, and making it as normal and as seamless as possible is going to benefit them greatly. So with that being said, set ground rules. If you or another adult in the household are working from home, make sure everyone has their separate workspace. Even if you're on either sides of the couches, if someone's in the dining room and someone's in the living room, it's important to give them their own space that they can work and learn in with minimal distractions. And obviously, if there's more than one child at home learning, their experience is going to look a little different. So trying to separate them as well, or at the very least giving them headphones so they don't distract one another. Express concerns. This is a difficult time for everybody, and while we'd like to think we're all handling it like rock stars, which most of you are, I can attest to that, we're going to have to make some adjustments along the way. So in order to do that, we're going to have to speak up. If something your child's teacher is doing doesn't work for them, have them tell the teacher or speak up on their behalf, because a lot of the administrators and teachers are kind of flying by the seat of their pants. They may have had a plan going in place this school year, but we're going to learn as we go. And if the issues aren't brought up in real time, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to make the adjustments and make everything successful for the youth. Spend free time wisely. Once the school day is finished and their homework is complete, have the kids step away from the screen, and when possible, get outside. I know it's getting colder, but we're still blessed with 70-degree weather today, so I think we still have a few warm days left. Spending too much time in one spot or in front of a screen all day can not only be mentally exhausting, but bad for our health too. And we've heard this from numerous sources and plenty of different ways to combat it. Luckily, teachers schedule breaks throughout the days, or at the very least, there's a lunch break. But the more time your kids can spend on their own, doing fun things that don't require a heavy online presence, the happier they'll be. And this goes for parents too, because a lot of us are still working from home and need to learn how to manage our time as well, not just for our kids. And the last, but definitely not least, and probably my favorite element of breaking up the virtual school day is self-care. This is something that was ingrained in us in grad school. Getting to be counselors is learning to take care of yourself. The internet is a crazy place full of plenty of gadgets and gizmos we don't need, especially on one of Amazon Prime days. However, there are a few items that can make working from home easier for both kids and adults. Examples include an oil diffuser to create a more relaxing environment, blue light glasses, which I happen to have on my head now, to reduce the headaches caused by extended screen time, headphones to help focus on the task at hand, kind of like I mentioned earlier, and standing or lap desks to make working from a stationary position slightly more bearable and comfortable. In addition to these work-specific self-care choices, other options include having a phone-free period. I don't know about anybody else, but I know when I'm feeling anxious or overwhelmed, especially after having a long day of Zoom calls or phone calls, I need time away from my phone. So I'll either put it on airplane mode or do not disturb and say, I'm going to complete this one task without looking at my phone. So I might do the dishes or go through a load of laundry or vacuum the carpet and just stay away from my phone. Sometimes it's not possible for us, but if we can do it, even if only for a moment, it does kind of give us that time to disconnect and really focus on ourselves. Maybe taking a longer than normal bath or shower. You'd be surprised how a few extra minutes of just you time away from the kids or away from your spouses or anybody else in the house could definitely help. Treat yourself to ice cream or maybe a special coffee. Anything that gives you that you time is so important, because while self-care is important for our youth, it's equally as important, if not more, for us as adults and professionals, because we're no good to anybody if we don't take care of ourselves. So that's definitely something I want to drill home for most of the parents watching. And the last thing I want to talk about are some signs that your child is struggling. Now, before I go down the list, because I'm looking at this and say, I could check off almost all of them for myself, it's important to realize that a lot of these can be considered normal or unharmful if they're how your child typically functions. If any of the things that I describe are occurring, we usually say that they would have to take place for a prolonged period of time or be a large enough deviation from their day-to-day life to be areas of actual concern. So when I say isolation, I mean that they're keeping to themselves more than they normally would. So maybe not joining in on family game night or sitting on the couch watching a movie with everyone, and maybe even, keeping themselves in their room for longer periods of time, just not socializing the way that they normally would. Hypersensitivity, this could be being overly sensitive to things that wouldn't normally bother them. So maybe more easily offended by jokes or pranks, crying at appropriate or inappropriate times, easily angered, stuff like that. Decreased energy. This would be just them reporting that they're feeling lethargic, maybe not wanting to participate in their sports if sports are back up and running again, or just not having the energy to do the things that they normally love. Disruptive sleep pattern. Anything that's prolonged and deviates from their normal sleep schedule. So it could look like staying up later, waking up earlier, not sleeping as much, or sleeping too much. Change in appetite. This could mean eating too much, so possible binge eating, or not eating enough, so more restrictive behaviors. And the inability to focus or fidgeting. As I'm sitting here talking, I can feel myself moving my hands a lot and maybe even shaking my leg. So again, I know that's normal for me, but if a youth doesn't normally bite their nails, or if they're not usually so fidgety or shaky, or they can normally sit through a puzzle and now they can't even get two pieces together. These are just a few things that we want to keep an eye out for. And again, I don't want to alarm anyone watching this. If your child is having trouble sleeping, it could just be that it's too hot in their room, or they really just want to play a few more minutes of their video game. Not all of these are necessarily warrants for concern, but it's definitely something to keep an eye out for if it's prolonged, or if, like I said, it's a very big change from how they normally act. And none of this is COVID specific. A lot of what we discussed seems to be on the rise because of COVID, or more obvious, but all of these signs and symptoms, anything that would hinder a youth's social emotional development, can really occur in day-to-day life. That's why I made the adjustment to the title to say "and beyond," because a lot of what I like to do with my youth and the families that I work with is give you the advice that will extend beyond our time together. So also I want it to extend beyond the time of the pandemic. And before we get into the question and answer portion, I did just want to reiterate a little bit about what I do for Anchor House and what Anchor House does for the community. We do have a lot of resources available, so I won't claim that we are the end-all be-all and the only place to go in Mercer County or in Trenton for help. We do have a lot of connections to other agencies in the community, whether it's CMO, FSO, any of the schools. We definitely will connect parents and youth to other referrals or other resources, as needed. We're definitely a good place to go for that. Referrals, as far as my involvement goes directly in the schools, most of the counselors or administrators have access to my referral forms. If for some reason they don't, they can absolutely contact me and I'll be more than happy to send it over. And the parents can make the referrals as well. If somehow the counselor said, you know what, Miss Smith, I want you to have this referral form and a little bit about what Anchor House does. Susie might benefit from talking to the school outreach counselor. I'll let you have this, and if you feel like you want to hand it in to us and take advantage of those services, you certainly can. And obviously my contact information is here on the screen. It could be also available by contacting Denise. We do, despite social distancing guidelines in the current pandemic, we do allow walk-ins or drop-ins to any of our locations, including the shelter. And we will help the best that we can. Any way that we can be of service to the community, especially during this difficult time, we'll be more than happy to do so. So with that being said, if anyone has any questions or if we've noticed anything pop up in the chat, now we can take the time to address that.